modified Klamath style. Got that paleo drip, boy. Here's how I make moccasins. Need a plastic bag, pin, scissors, tape, and a glover's needle is very important if you want to sew leather, and some artificial sinew. So just first you need a pattern. So you're gonna start just by tracing your foot, and then you decide basically how the pattern should be. I'm following this one based on Klamath Modoc, but it's slightly modified from that. Okay, so after you've outlined your foot, you want to decide upon the outline of the moccasin, and you take this and you sort of draw it around that. You kind of just have to kind of eyeball it. So I'll just do it for you. So this one, I kind of did it like that. And I have 3 different outlines here, but the inner one is my inner foot. I was just curious about the other angles. This is a very rough drawing here. Anyway, you cut out that, and then once you have your form, you want to tape it together where the seams are supposed to be. And then you fit your foot in there. You make sure it all fits. This, by the way, is part of it, the tongue. Put your foot in there, make sure it all fits, and then cut back along the seams there. And you can actually alter where you want your seams to be. So say I have it cut here, and it's all taped up. I could actually make the seam right there if I wanted to. I would just cut down at that part. But the problem is it makes it harder to unfold. So the moccasin plans should be easy to unfold, basically. So what that means is that the seams need to be kind of on ridges. So you see how seams are often in the back? It's because that means when you cut it, you can lay it flat easier. And there's a seam along there. It's kind of more convenient. It's not the tip of the toe. I actually added a seam right there so I can have it more covering. It just worked better for my foot. Okay, so you cut it open along the seams. Actually, I already did this with the duct tape. You want to have a continuous layer. I just secured it back with this medical tape to show you. So then you have your plan, and it should lay pretty flat. Now you're going to take that plan and trace it on your leather. It's best, I think, to trace a little bit outside of it. That makes it easier so you're not trying to get up right up against the pattern. It'll give you some space for the stitching, although moccasins do tend to stretch a lot, so it's not really necessary. You want to look at the hide and decide what spot on the hide is gonna waste the least amount of leather, because you're gonna need to do a second one of these, and that's easy. You just flip it, it's the mirror image. But you also want to keep into mind that depending on what kind of hide you're using, where it's thick and where it's weak. Spots along the belly and then the legs, basically towards the edges of a standard hide, are going to be the weak spots, whereas along the spine and neck area, those are going to be the tougher parts of the hide. Put my pattern where to waste the least amount of the hide. It's right here. I can just flip over. I like to trace in pencil instead of ink. You can somewhat modify the pattern also if you've noticed weak spots, like right here, cut too deeply into the sole. But this is, of course, if you're just kind of coming up with a new pattern, which I tend to do, experiment on. I have one design that has the toe separated from the rest, like some Japanese tabby shoes. Don't forget my tongue. I'm gonna have some nice sharp scissors for that, and some sewing scissors. Side on the inside. You can also check the fit. This is where you can decide how deep the seams you want to go, because that can change the fit a bit. So these are about a perfect fit, so I'll probably just have a minimal seam there. Probably sew this to around to there. And this one is gonna have a little heel tab, but I'll just do that at the end, and that will also make the fit tighter as needed. Here's the first one completed. Has this little heel tab on the back. It's easy to take off and put on. This is inside out. You'll need to sew it first inside out and then turn it right side out to wear it. All of it is done with a whip stitch, which I'll show you in a second, except for the heel right there. And the heel you'll do last. The orders of stitching is important. You do the heel, top of the foot, toes, side, tongue, and then this portion on the heel tab. So it's inside out. The whip stitch goes goes in one side, and you always enter from the same side each time around. Pull it tight, make sure the threads aren't bunching. That's one stitch. Do it again. Keep a nice border between your stitches and the edge of the leather so it doesn't tear. That's it. And I'm at the end here, so I'll just do a little knot by putting it through the same hole as the last one, pulling it around, making a small loop, then doing a double overhand, pulling it tight. Then I'll go under an adjacent stitch. It goes through the leather, that's okay, you'll have to push it. Small loop. So these are the tools you need for the job. The Glover's needle is by far the most important. You can't use a standard sewing needle for leather. It needs to have a very sharp point, and those are called Glover's needles. All these materials you should be able to get at a fabric store, hobby or craft store. Leather, which you can also buy at the same place. I buy mine online through a special leather and fur vendor. Some sharp fabric scissors. You can also cut it with a flint flake, but man, it's a little bit more clean. I like to use jeweler pliers, especially for very thick leathers. This one doesn't need to so much, but when you're pushing it through the leather, sometimes the needle gets stuck in there. It's very hard to pull out just with your fingers without it slipping. So use the pliers to pull it the rest of the way through. With the jeweler's variety of pliers, don't have any knurling or grips on there, so it's not gonna mess up the needle. Have a tool for marking points and a thimble. So you need that for pushing. You also need some sort of waxed thread. This is called artificial sinew. It's just nylon that has been waxed. The way to use it is separating the strands into the right size. It's the standard size that's too thick for leather sewing, so I would use maybe one of these strands, or depending on if I want to do some really sturdy part. You can also use waxed cotton thread, or just wax your own thread if you want. Maybe even floss. I'm pretty sure that's just waxed nylon. Now for the tongue, at this point, instead of finishing the stitch with a knot, I'm going to make sure that it fits right, because this will determine whether the fit is very snug or not. So you can see I started in the middle, I went to one side, so I'm just going to leave this hanging. Obviously you can only do this with 2 Glover's needles, but I recommend getting a nice set, 2 full different sizes for, I don't know, $10 or $20. And then I'll start on the other side, and once I get to center point on this one, I'll turn it inside out or right side out, try it on, and determine if I want the stitch to go further, if it's ready to tie off. Tongue mostly done there, just not tied off. Turn this inside out, right side out, that is. And try it on. Seems to go on pretty nicely. I think maybe just one more stitch on each side, then I'll tie it off. Good fit, and I'll pull out the heel. I'll walk around a bit and it'll create a natural fold there, which will determine where my stitch line is. Use my pliers. right next to it. Here we go. With these heel tabs, you can also choose to do a little stitch and fold them up. I like it. I'm gonna make it so I can hang them like this because I'm going barefoot all the time. I'll just clip them onto my bag. And also it's a convenient spot to pull them off. So let's try them on for the first time. Looking pretty fly. As the kids would say these days, got that paleo drip, boy. Extremely comfortable, mobile. Only a step below being actually barefoot. These will protect me for some greenbrier thorns, cactus, dewberry. There's a lot of that nonsense in the woods. Very comfortable. Now, I'm not going to take these long walks on concrete because those can wear out the soles real quick. This is a pretty thin leather, but for walking outside on trails and dirt and grass and brush, these will last a long time. Made a bunch of different pairs, and not quite like this design is the first in this, with a modified Klamath style, but I actually really like these more than the other ones. Extremely comfortable, easy to slip on and off. And that tongue will protect my legs right there from thorns. Often I'll drag across thorns and they'll get cuts right here. So yeah, I'm very happy with how these turned out. I made this pair out of brown leather, the otherwise identical, and these are the only shoes I've worn for the past month. Wear them every day. You can see a little bit of wear on the sole, but it's hardly gotten through much at all. The only time which I don't like to wear them is in wet weather because they absorb water and get your feet and socks wet, but they also tend to be very slippery on wet, smooth surfaces. But other than that, they're great for everything. Run along rocky trails, need to wash them, but stitching is holding up great. About the highest wears on the front of the toe and along the sole. When you're tracing your foot, you want to make sure and keep the pin straight up and down. It doesn't need to be perfect. And here's the formalized design, which I made by taking that plastic bag and putting it on paper. And after making some adjustments, making my first pair, made it onto this paper. So it's a little bit more accurate. And I'll show you a really radical technique that I invented that will allow you to make literally any design that you can possibly think of that will fit your foot perfectly. And this way you can get very creative. And this is how I made some with the big toe split off. This is just some medical gauze. Just want to make sure you have complete coverage of your skin. So right after that, we're gonna wrap your foot in duct tape. And you don't want it to be tight. You want it to conform to your foot perfectly. Doesn't need to be pretty, but make sure it conforms to your foot well and isn't overly tight in any areas. You're basically making kind of a cast of your foot. And then now from here, we get to determine where the seams will be simply by cutting it. Now I like to cut along ridges because that's gonna make it fold the flattest. So let's try, I'm gonna try something I've never done before, but we'll see how it works. And once you get to a point like this, I'm envisioning being able to fold it outward so it lays flat. So I got another area we'll need to cut, probably along the heel. That might be it. Let's see how flat we can get this. Could lose a little bit along the heel here, I think. You can kind of tell where you've taken it off, where the ridges still are. I think right up to right there. And there we go, I think that would do it. So totally unique, never made before, custom moccasin design, made for your feet. And then let's cut around the mouth of the shoe so we have a nice clean edge. And I might want to later go in and add a tongue because this is obviously going to be skin tight here. For now, this will make a good first pass for a pattern. So I'll trace this onto a plastic bag. You could also use a paper bag, of course. I like plastic bags because they're a little bit more flexible. Now let's try cutting this out and seeing how well it fits. And I'll do this multiple iterations and going around and adjusting and fixing until I get something that I like. So it looks like it's a little short on the seams right here. I think I had that duct tape pretty tight around this area. That accounts for that. Seams aren't close enough. Need to be a little bit bigger in some of these areas. So what I can do is just adjust it where I see the gaps right there and there by retracing another piece of plastic, but you get the point. You should be able to copy this exact pattern. I'm a size 11, but you could print this out and reduce it to scale. I also have a pattern on my website, paleoforging.com/skills.